It's the week ending Saturday, the 21st of December, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump becoming just the third US president in history to be impeached, Labour politicians clashing over the future of the party after their thrashing in the general election, and Laura Whitmore replacing Caroline Flack as host of Love Island. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Kari, Wilkin, Gabriel Power and Hollie Clemence. Kari, you're starting the show this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Should surrogacy only be a labour of love?
New year, new baby. People has confirmed that Kanye West and Kim Kardashian West are expecting their fourth child via surrogate. The couple already share 3 kids, North, who's 5, Saint, who's 3, and Chicago, who's 11 months, was also born via gestational surrogate. Now, back in August, when Chicago was just 7 months old, a Keeping Up with the Kardashians source told People that Kim and Kanye weren't in a huge rush to give their kids another sibling.
A report from People magazine on the Kardashians. Kari, are we doing showbiz gossip?
God forbid, no. No,
Shame.
This is obviously about surrogacy. Kim Kardashian West had a baby that's now been born, her 4th child, Sam, I believe his name is. He was born this summer, and she's had her second 2 children were born through surrogacy because she suffered during her first 2 pregnancies with a condition called placenta accreta, which basically is when part or all of the placenta remains connected to the uterine wall after childbirth, which can result in severe and even fatal blood loss.
But also, if you could afford to let someone else do that for you.
I must admit,
didn't you?
When I first saw the headlines, I was like, oh, she can't even... No, I'm not even going to go there. But
She had 1 or 2, though.
Yeah, she did.
I genuinely, I think my wife, if that was an option, would be like, yeah, let someone else do that bit for me.
This is all part of the debate of what's coming up.
Go for it.
Right, so this week, the Supreme Court is hearing an appeal against a ruling that the NHS should have to pay over £500,000 for a woman to have a surrogate child in the US after doctors' failure to spot her cervical cancer left her infertile at the age of 29. Now, the Whittington Hospital NHS Trust admitted negligently failing to detect her cancer for 4 years, which resulted in her becoming infertile. But they're challenging this ruling that they should have to pay for her to have surrogacy in the US. The woman was initially awarded £580,000 to have fertility treatment and surrogate children by surrogacy in the UK, but she then appealed and won the appeal.
Why?
So basically, she wants to have it in the US because in the UK, you're only allowed to have what's called an altruistic surrogacy, which is where the person carrying the child isn't being paid beyond their expenses. So, those expenses can add up, things like travel and treatment costs and maternity clothes.
Yeah, but she had £580,000.
Well, yeah. So basically in America or in some US states, I think it's about 10 US states, you can do something that's called commercial surrogacy.
But is that not enough to go to America and do that if that's what she wants to do?
Well, basically the commercial surrogacy is where you effectively pay the surrogate a wage on top of the expenses, and that can be very expensive.
More than £500,000.
This woman, she froze a certain number of eggs before she had the treatment, but there's no guarantee that they're going to take. So, it could take a number of attempts. And basically, surrogacy in the US can cost anything sort of around £120,000.
OK, so there's a debate in the UK, both about, I guess, whether the NHS should be paying for mistakes at all. But let's park that point at the moment because they have. No one's saying they shouldn't at this point. And there's a debate about whether we in the UK should have the same laws on surrogacy that they have in the US, whether we should allow women to be paid.
To be fair, there are no federal laws regulating surrogacy in the US. It varies between states, so it's not clear cut.
So the same lack of laws then?
Yeah.
OK, well, let's have that debate then. Gabe?
I don't think we should have the same... I don't think the US and the UK should have the same system, no. I think it's too touchy a subject. I think it's almost... In all honesty, I mean, obviously, I'm probably not an authority to speak on the subject that much, but I feel like it's almost impossible to legislate surrogacy in general, because no matter which way you go, no matter whose side of the court the ball is in terms of the expectant parents or the surrogate mother, somebody's going to end up like really unhappy.
But Holly, one of the things that people say in favour of the US system of allowing commercial surrogacy is that because there's a contract, because money's changed hands, you're less likely to encounter the obvious occasional issue that someone gives birth to the children and then doesn't want to give them away.
Yeah, I think the lack of laws also causes problems, like you say. So even without making it commercial, i.e. not paying somebody, you could still legalise the contract, which we don't have here, which would make a big difference, I think, just setting out what's going to happen once that baby's born, because there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the point when the child's actually born. And we tend to favour the woman that's given birth rather than the woman that's donated an egg. So the birth mother would be classed in British law as the mother until she's kind of passed over those rights to the woman that is given the egg or the embryo.
Yeah, according to UK law, actually, the woman who gives birth is the legal mother regardless of the biological origins of the child. And if they're married or in a civil partnership, her spouse is the other legal parent, even if they've had nothing to do with this whole process. And the parental rights can be transferred by parental order or adoption after the child's born. But that can take months, which is obviously very stressful for all involved. And if disputes do arise, it's up to the courts to decide. And that sort of highlights the key problem that in the UK, you can sign surrogacy agreements where you say, yes, I'll hand the child over. But if the surrogate, becomes attached, which it's not out of the question, is it? Then that agreement cannot be enforced by law. Surrogacy has actually been called the fertility treatment that time forgot, because the laws just haven't been updated, even though we've had these huge advances in IVF and in all these processes that make surrogacy so much more viable in a scientific sense.
But presumably a lot of people think the laws shouldn't be updated. There must be people out there who say, no, they're there for a reason. It's reasonable if someone gives birth to a baby that they get first dibs, if you like, whether it was their egg or not. And it's reasonable that people don't get a financial compensation for helping someone.
I think there's a kind of icky feeling about commodifying your womb or a baby or human life. That idea that you're paying for a child, it makes a lot of people feel really uncomfortable, and I can see why we wouldn't want to rush to do that straight away. But at the same time, you can completely understand the pain of parents who are desperate for a child, and if that is the answer, to have your egg, your husband's sperm, grown in another lady's womb, but it's still essentially kind of your genes, if that's what you really want, then it seems hard to stop someone from doing that.
Kari.
I think one other concern with commercial surrogacy, it's what's going on in countries abroad. Thailand recently closed its doors to foreign intended parents after a series of scandals. Nepal suspended commercial surrogacy in 2015. And in India, there's a huge industry. It's worth about $2.3 billion a year. And surrogates are often only getting about $3,000 per pregnancy. And there have been many cases where people have tried to track the surrogate mother of their child from India and haven't been able basically to find any trace. And there's major fears of quite widespread coercion.
Well, also, I wonder how many people actually go to prison for accepting or paying money to a surrogate. I mean, if it's all done informally, if you make a gift to someone who's helped you in that very, very intimate and special, devoted way, I mean, it doesn't seem to me like something the police are going to be chasing up.
Well, I remember not only that, like doing payments kind of on the sly, but what I actually remember reading an article recently about surrogacy, whereby a lot of parents who are using a surrogate will pay the surrogate a lot more than maybe some sort of amount that they're allowed to be paid under UK law, above and beyond the expenses that we were talking about earlier. They then declare that they've spent this afterwards, after the baby is born and it's been transferred to their custody. Because then what are the courts going to do? They're going to say, oh, you've paid £100 too much, we have to take your baby away from you. They're not going to break up a family like that. I feel like there is definitely scope to bypass the rules. They're not exactly watertight.
I think there's also been a chipping away at the laws, as if you do bring a child back from another country, judges probably will be inclined to leave it with the parents that have taken it, because in some cases you can't even track down the original surrogate parent. So that's going through the courts rather than through politics. So we could be voting in a party that chooses to have a particular rule on this, whereas it is happening through the courts in a different way.
There was actually a case in 2010 involving a baby identified as baby L, who was born by commercial surrogacy in Illinois to British parents. And the High Court granted parental orders and established the principle that unless cases are a clear abuse of public policy, parental orders should be granted. So effectively green lighting that.
Gabriel.
I was thinking that there might be an answer to all of this, which would be progress scientists are making with artificial wombs, which would kind of bypass the whole thing. So about 2 years ago, we have we kind of are on the cusp of having the technology to do this. It's obviously not readily available, but about 2 years ago, scientists managed to birth, in very inverted commas, I suppose, a lamb in an artificial womb, and it survived. And they then killed it to research its vital organs to see if it had been affected in any way, but it seemed absolutely fine. And so I feel like we are genuinely on the cusp of this sort of thing. This technology has been kind of posited for decades and decades and decades, since the 50s, I think, when people first drew up plans for it. But we can do it,
and then
it would solve
ethical,
so many problems.
Well, you then have the ethical quandary about whether you offer that service to women who simply just don't want to carry a child rather than are physically incapable of doing so.
There are so many. It's not a clear-cut argument. You know, I have I've got very mixed feelings about surrogacy. But going back to what Gabe was saying about the mechanical wombs, whatever you want to call them, I think one pro of surrogacy is that the surrogates can develop a close relationship with the child and the parents, and you almost, it's almost a double win for the kids in that they almost get two sets of parents, and you can develop these, amazing relationships. And obviously, there's all the cons as well, that the surrogates may experience physical and emotional problems. It's such a woolly topic, but I think we should acknowledge that there can be a lot of positives from the whole surrogacy process as well, in that sense.
And it's weird that people probably wouldn't feel any ickiness about a commercial organisation profiteering off the back of their artificial womb. Whereas when it's a person who's, effectively carrying a baby for someone, you'd get paid for maternity cover, wouldn't you?
I mean, there might be some sort of stigma that develops around being born in an artificial womb.
Really?
From one.
I think playground bullying is going to go to that level?
Have you seen? Like artificial wombs look really strange.
Your mum's a robot.
It looks like a lamb fetus in a sandwich bag. It's very weird.
Okay, well, on that note, Gabriel, you're up next after this. Gabriel, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Are major tech firms undermining their own business practices?
This is one of the thousands of unregulated, unmonitored mines in the DRC. It's crawling with children, working like modern-day slaves. A 12-hour-long day of punishing work may earn them the equivalent of £1. Although one of the poorest countries on earth, DRC is rich in minerals. But a history of brutal colonial exploitation looks like being repeated.
A special report from Sky News entitled Inside the Congo Cobalt Mines That Exploit Children, which gives you a good idea, Gabriel, of what your story is. Although that video's not from this week. What happened this week?
This week, it was announced that Apple, Google, Tesla and Microsoft are among a number of tech firms that have been named in a major lawsuit in the US, seeking damages over deaths and injuries of child laborers in the cobalt mining industry in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay, right, let's give us a quick précis then. What is cobalt? What products is it in?
Cobalt is a chemical element and a metal that is mined, 60% of which is mined in the DRC, and it's used in lithium-ion batteries, which are rechargeable and used by all the major tech firms in phones and electric cars and other rechargeable devices.
So the chances are, right now, you are listening to us using a device that contains cobalt from the Congo.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so how did the lawsuit come into being then?
So the lawsuit was brought by a humanitarian group called International Rights Advocates. There's long been claims that the mining cobalt is extremely dangerous and under-regulated in the DRC, and tech firms have come under fire repeatedly over the last, however long we've been using cobalt, which would probably be at least a decade, if not more. And so this rights group sifted back through the supply chains of all these major firms using cobalt in their devices and found that they were using child labor, it's like effectively, or through proxy, on behalf of 14 children found to have been working in the DRC's mines, 6 of whom died while doing so.
And have any of the tech companies actually responded to these allegations?
They have, and we've done a briefing on this, so the full statements are on www.theweek.co.uk/unwrapped. Essentially, they're saying most of them have investigated it, or they will be investigating it, looking into it. Apple says that it's, for example, Apple is one that keeps saying that it's looking into it. The problem is that the supply chain is really opaque. So even if you think that you know where one bit's coming from, there's like a smelting system, so you don't know where it's come from before that. and DRC itself is very difficult to kind of get to the bottom of what's gone where. So they've all said they're looking into it, basically.
Although, I saw a documentary film about this, which was released in 2011, which tells you how long this has been going on for, called Blood in the Mobile. It's a brilliant film, actually. It was a Scandinavian documentarian called Frank Paulson, I think. And he flies out in the film to the DRC and goes to find a mine. And it is pretty prickly. I mean, he has to have armed guards who are obviously not with the state, and there are people there who are threatening to hurt him if he goes in the mine. But nonetheless, he gets there, and he clearly films people who are underage working in the mines, no helmet, clearly at risk of all sorts of dangers. And Apple is the world's, well, as we were discussing last week, now second largest company. They could certainly do that too. Like, if a documentary maker can find that information, this argument of the supply chain is opaque is a bit weird, because however it gets to the phone, whatever other companies are involved, you can go to the mines and see who's in the mines.
There are mines that are fine, though. There are mines that are abiding by the rules. In the country, the rule is not to have under 18s. But obviously, on some days, some officials might let under 18s in. On some days, they might not. In some mines, they have proper equipment. In other mines, they're letting children go down in massive caves that has got nothing holding them up. I think the problem is knowing exactly where your cobalt in your phone has come from.
Why doesn't Apple own their own mine? Is that too simplistic an argument?
I think they would probably argue that they don't have the expertise and they'd be taking away that source of income from the country. Apple claims to have been mapping the cobalt supply chain since 2014. In 2016, they said they'd listed and audited all cobalt refiners in the country. And actually, the following year, that was when the Congolese government reformed the mining code to introduce penalties for using child labour. But the problem is, as Holly was saying, the mines are rarely inspected. It's almost impossible to police, or certainly with the current provisions that are being made. Lawyers actually say this DRC, this new case that's been filed in America, it's been brought in Washington to avoid the notoriously corrupt judicial system in DRC, and because there are no laws in the DRC to enable plaintiffs to seek damages against major players. So although there are allegedly all these safeguards being put in place, they're all fairly ineffective.
I suppose it's similar, isn't it, Gabriel, to the factories in China, where we know that there are human rights concerns about workers who make phones and components for the world's largest American tech companies. But the argument is, these guys have got other problems going on. And it's the same in the DRC. Like, of course, it's terrible if their children die doing this. But if you shut down the mine, that would be worse for the community there than taking this lawsuit.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it is a source of income. And the problem is you have two different types of mine, really, when it comes to cobalt mining in the DRC. You have major mining firms, like commercial mines, the majority of which in the DRC are owned by Glencore, another Chinese company called Zhejiang Huayu. I hope I pronounced that right. But they've both been implicated in the lawsuit. So it's clear that their business practices are not perfect, and they're the commercial ones that are supposed to be safeguarded by labor laws in the country. And then there are artisanal mines, which are basically like amateur mines that can be run by like warlords, and they would be harvesting cobalt for as a conflict mineral to further their military operations or whatever. But the problem overall is that, yes, it is a source of income, but the fact that major firms are investing, like such as Glencore, are investing in the DRC, and then they're still not giving any sort of employment rights or giving any sort of decent pay to their workers, allegedly, is obviously an issue.
Obviously, it is very difficult to tackle this issue, but campaign groups have successfully put pressure on, diamond and gold miners to clean up their supply chains. And yet there's been so little progress with cobalt. It's been dubbed the blood diamond of batteries.
Well, may I suggest a reason for that, which is you don't need a gold ring, but everyone has a smartphone in their pocket.
You'd think, though, that the DRC would take advantage of this. As a government, you would think this is our best opportunity to make money. Why don't we make it ethical so people can actually make money, invest in the communities, and charge more, make money for it, because everybody wants a smartphone, and more importantly, everyone will want an electric car at some point.
And in the West, is paying huge amounts of money for it too. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? My current smartphone, I think, costs RRP £1,300. I mean, it's obscene what you pay for it.
But perhaps there's the worries from these, and let's remember these are among the richest companies in the world, dealing with one of the poorest countries. But perhaps the threat is, that we'll just take our business elsewhere, and the amount of money they are pumping in, and if they're not willing to pump in that little bit more to make sure that these processes are ethical, these kids are being paid as little as equivalent to £1.50 a day.
It does sound like the DRC has got the upper hand though in this, because there's not many other places where you can actually find it. If they're producing 60%, there was some statistic that if you didn't take it from DRC, we would have no lithium-ion batteries. So they just seem to not be able to take advantage of it.
The thing about it is that there is a strange irony in all of it, which is that electric cars and other kind of electrical battery-powered forms of tech are going to lead the way when it comes to a sort of green revolution that the Western world is undergoing.
Yeah, so you're doing good by buying this product.
We're told that it's good, but obviously the irony is that it creates, for instance, if we have a city of electric cars, it cleans up the air and we can breathe freely. But even the fumes that are emitted by cobalt mines, are highly toxic. So we're taking the clean air and we're lumping them with the horrible toxic stuff. It's sort of like colonial exploitation.
And God knows what we're doing to these children for generations to come. There was a study last year where they found that kids living in one cobalt mining area in the DRC had traces of this toxic heavy metal that were 10 times higher than people living elsewhere in the nation. And, this cobalt can cause DNA damage. It can cause birth defects. So they could be dealing with the effects of this for generations to come.
But I guess also there isn't an ethical alternative to the cobalt product apart from don't buy so many electronics. Keep the ones you've got, stop upgrading.
The US passed a conflicts mineral law, and that was more to stem the flow of money that went on conflicts, a bit like Gabe was saying, which isn't such a big problem with cobalt compared to some of the other minerals. But it would also serve a purpose if they were to add it to their list for maybe getting some human rights on safety and not having child labour.
Gabriel, final word.
I don't know, the most contentious point of this lawsuit is the fact that it doesn't just accuse the firms of benefiting from the system out of ignorance. It accuses them of knowing the full extent of the child labour, which is it kind of, I don't know, I feel like Elon Musk, obviously CEO of Tesla or founder of Tesla, he kind of accidentally let slip that might actually be true by last year saying that in the future his battery-powered cars will no longer feature cobalt. So obviously, one, there is an alternative, as you were saying, and two, is that not a kind of, not an admission of guilt, but there's the fact that they keep needing reminding that, child labour, by the way, whenever you're making these batteries, you're using child labour. The fact that he's like, oh yeah, all right, yeah, we'll stop using cobalt.
That possibly the supply chain is being kept deliberately opaque.
And the video that we listened to the clip of from the beginning showed that the supply chain is also very muddled, like the artisanal mines run by warlords and the professional mines run by Glencore or whatever. Their products are mixed and nobody keeps track of it.
Okay, well, thank you for depressing us, and enjoy your Fitbits and iPads you're all going to get for Christmas. Holly, you're up next after this. And so finally this week, it's Holly. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
It's moving house about to get a whole lot more literal.
First tonight, the families on the brink of losing their homes along part of the Norfolk coastline.
13 houses in the coastal village of Hemsby near Great Yarmouth were evacuated at the weekend amid fears they could be washed into the North Sea. 2 are this evening hanging over the cliff edge. There are now calls for the government to step in and provide help.
A literal cliffhanger there from ITV News last year. Holly, what's the story this week?
So Karen Thomas, who's the head of Coastal Partnerships East, which manages the coastline of Suffolk and Norfolk.
Thank you for clarifying that job title, just in case you didn't have Karen Thomas on your speed dial.
She has suggested that portable homes might be the answer to UK's massive erosion problem. So, as you heard in that clip, houses are literally falling off cliffs. There's 32,000 homes expected to be threatened by coastal erosion by 2050. This goes up to 82,000 by the end of the century. So that's not even taking flooding into account. We've got more frequent, more extreme storms, big tides that are causing kind of one-off things so suddenly your land suddenly slips under your house, leaves your house teetering on the edge. If you look at the videos or the pictures, it is quite horrifying to see somebody's house literally about to fall or fallen into the beach.
Okay, I think we all understand the problem. There's climate change. We live on an island. The coast is eroding. People want to live by the coast. Get all of that. What the hell is a portable home?
So,
is that a caravan by any other name?
Well, Thomas suggests you could move your house one-off, not all the time, but when you need to, you could drag houses across the road, she says, or dismantle it and recreate it.
I mean, I'm
somewhere
not
else.
a construction worker, but without wheels, can you drag a house across the road?
I've never done it myself, but I have seen, like, on the road in other countries, like New Zealand, for example, you just get trucks that pick up houses and take them and put
Actually,
them down somewhere. Like, it does
okay.
exist. It's not impossible.
Like a kind of porter cabin style build house. It's not taking an old-fashioned brick house and dragging it across the road.
No. Well, this is the problem. The
Right.
UK are very focused on brick and concrete,
Yeah.
whereas there's this new kind of modular or off-site building where you create some of the things that you need for the house off-site and bring it to build a new house. And that is becoming increasingly popular. Somewhere like Sweden and IKEA houses, which has been...
Is that a thing?
Yeah, well, IKEA-owned company.
Yeah.
They're going to build houses in 2021. They're coming, modular homes. These aren't necessarily portable homes, but there is this idea of being able to construct a home very quickly and potentially deconstruct a home and build it somewhere else.
Okay, and as ever, Holly, you're charming us all with a smile in your voice as you present a story seriously. Do you think this is the future? Or do you think this is a funny story you read about?
No, I think we need to get our heads around it, and it won't be next year. But I don't doubt in decades to come that might be an option for people that literally can't get insurance or planning permission to build on the coast, but they're desperate to live with the sea in their window. That might be the next thing that they can do so that they don't lose all their money because insurers literally won't pay out for their homes.
Gabriel, do you think it's the future?
No. I don't know. It feels like we don't really have much of a choice. I mean, there are people that obviously will want to live near the coast if they can. But at the moment, UK law stipulates that you literally cannot get planning permission to build a permanent home in a coastal area that's due to erode over the next 100 years.
Yeah.
A non-permanent home that moves.
That's true. But it just feels like, putting a plaster on a broken leg. It's a problem that's going to keep coming up. I don't know. Is it not possible to
Kari is
pay
jumping
for
in a bit.
them
Let Kari come in.
Okay.
She's very passionate about this. I don't know where it's come from. Go for it.
I
Go
didn't
on.
realise I was this passionate about it. But, we're all making it sound like, I want a house by the sea and it's all a luxury problem. 10% of the world's population live in coastal zones at risk from rising sea levels. We're running out of land. This isn't just I want to live by the sea. This is, we're on an island. It's going to get smaller and smaller. We need the space. And we need to utilise the space we do have. So, yeah, that land might be gone in 100 years.
You don't literally need to live 200 metres from the coast, Kari. You're right. You need to live in Dorset. You don't need to live on the beach.
No, I mean, I'm probably slightly exaggerating, but we are running out of space. The world population's growing and land is shrinking. So we do need to come up with solutions. And, in some ways, portable homes are just a sticking plaster because we're not really addressing the issue that sea levels are rising. But we are going to have to address, lack of housing and, just things like affordable housing. This could be a good solution.
Modular housing definitely is an option for the housing crisis because it's just a quick way of getting homes up and potentially kind of environmentally friendly homes. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if it can move,
hold on.
what a bonus.
If I may speak up for Middle England, who might think there is something wrong with that, and I appreciate it's very difficult for people to get on the housing ladder and all the rest of it. But from the position of someone who does own a house and lives in an area that's really pretty, the problem I would have with modular homes is, are they going to look really horrible where I live? Yeah, all the areas around us where you might start building at the moment are beautiful green fields. The places where you're going to put permanent houses, you're going to build something architecturally pleasant. If you start putting up a load of portable housing, it's not necessarily a solution for everyone else's well-being.
I think we've got this post-war prefab idea of housing. I used to have the language block at school, which was basically built God knows when, and it had just lasted for centuries because people hadn't taken it down. It'll still be there in the year 4000, everyone learning their languages in this rat-infested block. But
it's a slight over-interpretation of my concern.
You can get beautiful new modern buildings that they don't have to be this horrible looking buildings.
Yeah, there's a Dutch company that's just been shortlisted. Well, it didn't win it, but it was shortlisted for the 2019 World Architectural Festival Awards, and they haven't been created yet, but they've developed these amazing looking modular water dwellings, they call them, and they're like floating homes, and they're absolutely really quite attractive looking houses, but they float. And, and they use energy provided by solar roof panels.
Do you mean they're on stilts?
On like a raft kind of thing.
Do you mean a boat?
No, it's not. It's not. It's a house on a raft, and the energy is provided by solar roof panels and heat exchangers, and it's all very clever. And there's a similar project in Florida. They are just houses, but they float.
Can you get a mortgage for one of these?
Oh, I don't know.
Because, a lot of the stories in the press are people who are losing their homes by the sea, they actually rent. So obviously it's still terrible for them, but they don't have the concern of losing that asset. But if you were going to try and build a house...
I assume you can get a loan based against a home.
But on what piece of land?
I guess it would have to be more widely recognised. But going back to what you were saying about, they'd be ugly.
Just avoiding the complex details of your question.
I don't know. If they're meant to be permanent homes, but you're moving them around, why shouldn't they be beautiful? As Holly was saying, it doesn't have to be this ugly sort of hideous...
I agree. I'm not saying they shouldn't be beautiful. I'm saying in reality, let's be honest, if you're buying a portable home that's prefab built, the chances are it might be less architecturally designed than the alternative.
But if you're looking at problems like climate change and overpopulation, does that really matter that much? Well, I know obviously you're speaking up for Middle England, and thank God somebody has. But no, I don't know. It's not worth worrying about. Like, we've already decimated much of the architectural landscape of this country in the 60s, 70s, 80s. There's some horrible, horrible architecture in this country.
No, but exactly.
I'm not sure
that was all provided as the solution to a housing problem then. And the best example of it is Barbican, which is still basically a big concrete skyscraper.
Excuse me, that's a grade 2 listed building.
I just said it's the best example.
Oh, I thought you said it was as in like an ugly one.
Well, I'm saying it is considered the best example, and yet it is still arguably not that attractive.
Well, we'll just have to disagree there.
But there's no reason they can't be made to be attractive.
I appreciate they can. I'm just saying there's a risk they won't.
There are a few places around the world now that are building 3D printed houses. And they can look quite nice. They're a bit odd and modernist in their design. They tend to be like spiral shaped or something. They don't look like a kind of traditional house. But they can be built in a day. They only cost about $10,000, and they're looking at getting it down to like $5,000. And they're great. And they're nice. And you can move them around.
If I gave you this option, if I was like, let's move to the coast, we can either have... we can have separate rooms. We can either have a nice 2-bed flat, in, Dorchester town centre, or we can live with a beautiful view, but at some point in the next 10 years, it's going to fall in the sea unless we move it to an as yet unknown location. What would your choice be?
I'm not against that. I love the sea. It sounds great.
I love the sea.
And you don't get bored if you keep moving your house around. It's brilliant.
Okay. Well, we could never get bored with you. My thanks to Hollie Clemence, Kari Wilkin and Gabriel Power for their help in assembling this prefabricated podcast. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. You can discover our entire back catalogue when you subscribe to The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. It's not moving anywhere, but you can play it on your portable device of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sarah Miles at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again next week to unwrap the year. Happy Christmas.